Extremism is the quality or state of being extreme, or the advocacy of extreme measures or views. The term is primarily used in a political or religious sense, to refer to an ideology that is considered to be far outside the mainstream attitudes of society. It can also be used in an economic context. The term is usually meant to be pejorative. However, it may also be used in a more academic, purely descriptive, non-condemning sense. Extremists' views are typically contrasted with those of moderates. In Western countries, for example, in contemporary discourse on Islam or on Islamic political movements, the distinction between extremist and moderate Muslims is commonly stressed. Political agendas perceived as extremist often include those from the far left politics or far right politics, as well as radicalism, reactionism, fundamentalism and fanaticism. There have been many different definitions of extremism. Peter T. Coleman and Andrea Bartoli give observation of definitions. Extremism is a complex phenomenon, although its complexity is often hard to see. Most simply, it can be defined as activities depending on the observer's values, politics, moral scope, and the nature of their relationship with the actor. In addition, one's sense of the moral or immoral nature of a given act of extremism may change as conditions change. Thus, the current and historical context of extremist acts shapes our view of them. Power differences also matter when defining extremism. When in conflict, the activities of members of low-power groups tend to be viewed as more extreme than similar activities committed by members of groups advocating the status quo. In addition, extreme acts are more likely to be employed by marginalized people and groups who view more normative forms of conflict engagement as blocked for them or biased. However, dominant groups also commonly employ extreme activities. Extremist acts often employ violent means, although extremist groups will differ in their preference for violent vs. non-violent tactics, in the level of violence they employ, and in the preferred targets of their violence. Although extremist individuals and groups are often viewed as cohesive and consistently evil, it is important to recognize that they may be conflicted or ambivalent psychologically as individuals, or contain difference and conflict within their groups. For instance, individual members of Hamas may differ considerably in their willingness to negotiate their differences with the Palestinian Authority and, ultimately, with certain factions in Israel. Ultimately, the core problem that extremism presents in situations of protracted conflict is less the severity of the activities but more so the closed, fixed, and intolerant nature of extremist attitudes, and their subsequent imperviousness to change. Erich Hoffer and Arthur Schlesinger Jr. were two political writers during the mid-20th century who gave what purported to be accounts of political extremism. Hoffer wrote The True Believer and the Passionate State of Mind about the psychology and sociology of those who join fanatical mass movements. Schlesinger wrote The Vital Center, championing a supposed center of politics within which mainstream political discourse takes place, and underscoring the alleged need for societies to draw definite lines regarding what falls outside of this acceptability. Seymour Martin Lipset argued that besides the extremism of the left and right there is also an extremism of the center, and that it actually formed the base of fascism. Laird Wilcox identifies 21 alleged traits of a political extremist, ranging from a tendency to character assassination and hateful behavior like name-calling and labeling, to general character traits like a tendency to view opponents and critics as essentially evil, a tendency to substitute intimidation for argument, or groupthink. Extremism is not a standalone characteristic. The attitude or behavior of an extremist may be represented as part of a spectrum, which ranges from mild interest through obsession to fanaticism and extremism. The alleged similarity between the extreme left and extreme right, or perhaps between opposing religious zealots, may mean only that all these are unacceptable from the standpoint of a supposed mainstream or majority. Economist Ronald Wintrobe argues that many extremist movements, even though having completely different ideologies, share a common set of characteristics. As an example, he lists the following common characteristics between Jewish fundamentalists and the extremists of Hamas. Among the explanations for extremism is one that views it as a plague. Arno Gruen said, "The lack of identity associated with extremists is the result of self-destructive self-hatred that leads to feelings of revenge toward life itself, and a compulsion to kill one's own humanness. Extremism is seen as not a tactic, nor an ideology, but as a pathological